When it comes to book series, one name stands above the rest, at least in terms of scope and scale and approachability, or should I say, a complete and utter lack of approachability. Yes, today we are talking Malazan. This video will be my full series spoiler-free review, or if you prefer, why you should read Malazan Book of the Fallen. Now, Malazan Book of the Fallen is a high fantasy series of the most epic proportions imaginable, and it's kind of difficult to describe exactly what Malazan is. You can typically sum up other series quite quickly, like A Song of Ice and Fire is all about the characters and the politics, or the First Law books are all about the comedy and the characters. Dandelion Dynasty is all about the ideas and the world building. Malazan, on the other hand, somebody's like, what's the book about? And you're like, well, it's kind of about everything. And it includes the characters of everyone. And then it's going to take place in a fantasy world. And in that world, it takes place kind of everywhere. And everything that could possibly happen is kind of going to happen in a slightly disjointed way that's a little bit broken up. And you kind of have to remember a lot at the same time. There's a lot. It's quite a lot. And then if you successfully sell somebody on the idea of reading this, which is, of course, what I'm trying to do with you today, you have to then try to brace them for the fact that the book is going to drop you into the middle of the world, into the middle of a story, into the middle of a bunch of characters, and all of this is already moving at full speed. It is not going to slow down. It's not like easing you into anything. You're dropped into the middle of it, going full speed, and you're just expected to hang on or keep up or something. And it only gets worse from there. But if it feels overwhelming, it is okay. Just get in there, go with it. Don't worry about it, because it is 100% worth it in the end. It will reward you and pay you back tenfold for every bit of effort that you put into reading this series. Now, some people will tell you, just read it one scene at a time. Ignore everything else around that scene that you're reading in that moment. Just be present there. And I say, that's not bad advice at all, quite honestly. But I would also say I kind of give the advice similar advice to what I give for the Book of the New Sun. And it's just kind of like, read it on a surface level. Just kind of float across the top of the story and experience it that way. Don't try to go too deep, too far, too fast into what's happening and who's in what's happening, the characters that are doing what and why and when and where and how, because like the Book of the New Sun is going to give you a bunch of ridiculous terminology that literally means nothing to you. And if you stop every 5 words to go to the dictionary and look it up, or look it up on your phone, you're going to take A, forever to read the book. B, it's going to break any flow that you have going, break any immersion that you have going, and it's going to kind of ruin the experience for you. That's the same with this. If you're trying to every other sentence, stop, look up the characters, try and remember who's who and what they were doing in the last scene that you saw them in, which could have been a few paragraphs ago, a few chapters ago, or even a few books ago, and you try to constantly reground yourself, it's going to break the flow, it's going to break your immersion, it's going to ruin the experience. Just kind of go with it, and you will get it you'll start to, the more you go with it, the more you'll be like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing with the way he's building this. I see what he's doing with the way these characters are working. And I see what he's doing with the overall ideas. Minutia will come in time. Just kind of roll with it. And if this sounds really overwhelming and intimidating, and you're at this point like, why would I want to do this at all in the first place? And I'm going to lean back on that scope. I know that sounds kind of crazy for the first thing to be like, yeah, because it's so big is why you want to try it. But that's kind of the point, at least for me, the scale and the scope of what he's doing with this world and with this story, and how he's able to encapsulate everything that he's able to do in this series. It is so awe-inspiring. I can't stress enough how highly I recommend experiencing what he has put on the page for the reader here. Malazan is one of the largest, most complex, and intricately built worlds I have ever read. It is literally the story of everything, and he will find a way to capture all of the human experience with all of the good, all of the bad, all of the ugly, and everything in between. And reading it and experiencing it is one of the highlights of just reading series and experiencing series that I have genuinely had, and it is so worth the effort. Now, speaking of that scope, like I said, book one kind of drops you right into the middle of the action, but at the very least, it's going to drop you into the middle of the action on one specific continent with a specific set of characters. Book two will then shift to a new continent with a new set of characters. They will bring over a handful of characters you know from the first book to keep you really grounded, and then book three is going to jump back to the original setting and kind of move on with that story from there. Then book four, we will kind of bounce back and forth. He will do his very best to keep you at all times grounded. He'll either bring some characters from the last book or move to a location that we are familiar with before we hit book five, and he does it again, introducing a whole new continent with a whole new set of characters. From here, in the back half of the series, he's going to do the exact same thing he did with the first half, constantly kind of going back and reminding you of who's where and who's doing what. And he does it so masterfully because he's constantly moving and expanding and growing to what feels like the biggest, most insane thing you've ever read in your entire life. But he does it in such a meticulously well-crafted way that he's always got one hand kind of on your shoulder, helping you along, guiding you through by giving you these little touchstones that keep you grounded as you go through so you don't ever feel too lost. You will feel lost, but it never feels overwhelmingly so because he's got this guiding hand that's helping you and keeping you steady as you move through this ever-expanding story, this ever-expanding world, this ever-expanding cast of characters. Next up, I want to talk about the world building and the writing. And I'm going to smash these two together. And it feels like typically I would want to separate these. These don't feel like normally they would go together in a video like this, but I'm going to put them together because I have the exact same thing to say about both of them. And that is because Steven goes fucking hard. Like, he goes so hard on the world building, and that's the first thing I want to try to explain about it. And then when it comes to the writing, Steven Erikson goes hard on the writing, and that would be my sell for both of those things. And he goes hard on the world building, both in terms of scope, which we've already talked about, but also just the world building in general, the continents that he's going to go to, the worlds, the peoples, the characters, the groups of peoples, everything about it. There are warrens which connect different realms. Sometimes the warrens are different realms. There are also the conduits for which magic flows through. There are different types of magic. There's new magic, there's old magic, there's gods, there's ascendants. It's a lot, and it is impressive. And I know, large, expansive world building with all of this magic going on sounds like pretty much typical fantasy series. I mean, even the Dandelion Dynasty was just such epic world building that's taking place on multiple continents with a huge cast of characters and the gods and everything was happening in that. But that was much gentler and much more straightforward almost. And it had a simpler approach to it, whereas this just goes hard. It feels like the same thing that other fantasy writers are doing, but when Erikson does the thing, it feels like he's got his foot on the gas in a way other fantasy series just don't. Then there's the writing, and like I said, Steven Erikson just goes so hard on the writing and the style and how he's going to present this to you. The prose is dense and sophisticated. It's beautiful and poetic and descriptive in a way that's both surprisingly vivid and unique. It is truly and simply amazing. Now, in terms of how hard he goes on the writing, I noticed it immediately in book one. I even brought it up multiple times in my Gardens of the Moon video with examples and everything. But really, it solidified in my mind in book two when there is a scene where a specific character crawls up onto the beach, and the whole first paragraph of that chapter is just insane. He literally could have said, so-and-so crawled up onto the beach. But no, he didn't. Instead, this is what we get. Faint ripples licked the marble-studded mud beneath the docks. Night insects danced just beyond the wearer's reach, and the bank itself seethed in the egg-laying frenzy of some kind of eels. In their thousands, black and gleaming, the small creatures writhed beneath the dancing insects. The silent breaching of the harbor's shore had for generations passed almost unnoticed by human eyes, a mercy granted only because the eels were wholly unpalatable. From the darkness beyond came the sound of cascading water. The ripples that reached the shore from the commotion were larger, more agitated, the only indication that a stranger had arrived to disturb the scene. Really? That's how... Anyway, I don't know. I just feel like he's going for it in his writing style in a way that just other authors are not. It's hard to explain. He goes hard. And I'm going to have to refer back, of course, to other series like just the poetry and the lyricism of like a Gormenghast, or the simplicity of the prose of the Dandelion Dynasty, or the nobility of the prose of A Song of Ice and Fire. They all have their own style and their own feel and their own vibe to them, but this just has so much more of a going hard, pedal to the metal, almost like a rock star vibe to the way that he's attempting to write this story, to the way he is writing the story. But more than anything, beyond the scope, beyond the world building, beyond the writing, the most important thing really about all of this, and the biggest reason why I would recommend somebody were to read this, is because this is such a touching story about humanity, hope, empathy, and sympathy. I have heard people describe this as a grimdark. If somebody describes this book to you as grimdark, they are doing both you and this series a disservice. There are parts of this series that are grim. There are parts of this series that are dark. There are quite a few of them, to be honest, but there is nothing about this series that is grimdark. If anything, he is using those as stepping stones or jumping off points to get to what he clearly really wants to talk about, and that is humanity, the human experience, and sympathy, empathy, what it means to empathize with somebody else. How do we end up in the places that we end up? How do we move forward from there? How can you accept something that has been done to you or you have done to somebody else? Who is worthy of empathy? Who's worthy of redemption? What does redemption even mean? What does it look like? And how would that work in a world that genuinely is grim, where dark things happen? He's going to focus on violence. Then he's going to focus on cycles of violence. What happens when the person who is hurting other people is only doing it because they themselves have been hurt? And then you get locked in a series of revenge stories where each revenge story is just as justified as the one that came before it, because the thing, that incident that started the whole thing that happened to that person was so bad, you feel 100% on board with their revenge story. But then you realize that so was the person before them, and the person before them, and the person before them. At what point does it stop? At what point does somebody step up, say enough is enough, and we can't keep going in circles like this? Nobody wins. These are the stories that he wants to tell. These are the points that he's trying to make. This is what he's doing. This is why there are these long philosophical musings that he will go on in between battles and these super dark, bleak moments, and you can tell that he's really writing these dark, horrible, awful, atrocious things, and he writes them so well, and they're so detailed and they're so descriptive, but you feel it when he shifts into the philosophical musing about the sympathy or the empathy or the cycles or the breaking of the system. And that's where you feel his heart really shining in his writing. And it makes it so clear that this isn't a story about the violence. This is a story about the humanity that has to endure through the violence. Now, after all of that said and done, I could give this book series a number rating. And if I did, I'd give it a 10 or a 5-star, whatever you can call it, 10 out of 10 series. I really genuinely think it is that. In terms of fantasy series, I feel like this one stands proudly among the top. Now, where will it fall when I do like a top 10 series of all time? I'm not entirely sure, because I'm not 100% sure I enjoyed it the most. I'm not sure it was the most impactful to me in my life, in my experience, or anything like that. But just in terms of sheer brute force of writing, skill, and ambition, and execution, what this man was able to achieve in this 10 books is truly stunning, truly gargantuan, and truly stands, like I said, shoulder to shoulder, right at the top. If you haven't read Malazan, please give Gardens of the Moon a try. It is 100% worth your time. And if for some reason you bounce off of it, do not feel bad. This isn't the story for everybody, even though I do genuinely think it is one of the best. And of course, everybody, as always, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.